They don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't feel pain, or pleasure, or fear. The Thousand Sons were once the most brilliant warriors in the galaxy. Now they are dust-sealed inside armor, marching at the command of sorcerers who promised them salvation, and the few who still remember what it was like to be human. They are the ones who suffer most. I remember nothing. That is not entirely true. Though the distinction hardly matters when your existence fractures between moments of hollow clarity and centuries of absolute void. My name is Sate Pra, or it was, when names meant something beyond the scratches etched into ceramite that no longer covers living flesh. I am a warrior of the Thousand Sons, servant of Magnus the Red, keeper of knowledge that burned our world to cinders and transformed us into something less than ghosts. I tell you this because, in this singular moment of awareness, I possess the capacity to understand what I am, and because I know, with absolute certainty, that this lucidity will not last. It never does. The dust calls me back, always, and I return to it as inevitably as a corpse returns to the earth. Except I cannot rot, and I cannot rest, and I cannot die. The battlefield stretches before me in a tapestry of ruin that my enhanced optics catalog with mechanical precision, even as my fractured consciousness struggles to assign meaning to the images. Smoke rises from 1,000 fires, black against a sky that shivers between crimson and violet. The colors of a bruised universe, where the materium frays and the immaterium bleeds through like infection through bandages. The ground beneath my boots is stone that was once ferrocrete, now warped into organic curves and angles that suggest bone or chitin or the inside of some massive throat. I stand among my brothers, 17 warriors in crimson and gold armor. I know that perhaps 3 of us are truly here, truly aware, while the others are merely animated suits of armor filled with enchanted dust and the psychic echoes of men who ceased to exist 10,000 years ago. I turn my head, the servo motors in my neck whining softly, and I see Kataru standing 3 meters to my right. His armor is pristine, despite the carnage we have waded through for what my chronometer insists has been 6 days, yet feels like 6 seconds or 6 centuries, depending on which fragment of my mind processes the information. His helmet visor glows with witchfire, and I know he is truly here, his consciousness riding the currents of sorcery that keep us tethered to these hollow frames. Beyond him stands ATF, who has not spoken in 3,000 years, whose armor moves with perfect precision, but whose mind departed long ago, leaving only the spell that animates his shell to carry out the last orders he received before the Rubric took him. The Rubric of Ahriman. Even thinking the name brings a cascade of half-memory and phantom sensation, the psychic equivalent of reaching for a limb amputated centuries ago and feeling the ghost of fingers that no longer exist. I remember fire. Or I remember the idea of fire. Or I remember being told about fire by someone who remembered it on my behalf. I remember standing in the great library of Tizca, the pyramid of Photep rising behind us like a mountain of wisdom made manifest. And I remember the sky splitting open as our Primarch's hubris invited catastrophe. The wolves came. The wolves always come in the end. Servants of a corpse god who feared knowledge and burned what he could not control. We fled. We fell. We followed our father into the eye of terror, that great wound in reality where the laws of physics become suggestions and time flows like water through broken fingers. And when Ahriman, first among our sorcerers, decided he would save us from the flesh change that was slowly transforming our brothers into mindless spawn, he enacted his great working. He gathered 9 times 9 sorcerers and spoke words of power that echoed across 9 star systems. He reached into the fabric of fate itself to preserve the 1,000 suns forever. He succeeded. Every warrior who possessed even a fragment of psychic gift survived intact, their consciousness bound into their armor by chains of sorcery stronger than any ceramite. And every warrior who lacked that gift, every brother who was merely mortal beneath his enhancements, turned to dust in an instant. Their bodies disintegrated inside their armor. Flesh and bone and blood became fine powder. And the same spell that saved the Psykers bound those ashes into a terrible animation. We do not die. We cannot die. We are trapped in an eternal moment between life and death, condemned to serve, to fight, to march at the command of sorcerers who regard us as tools no different from the bolters we carry. I know this because I remember it happening to me. The sensation returns sometimes in these moments of clarity, a psychic echo so vivid it feels like reliving the event rather than merely remembering it. I felt my skin split open from the inside. I felt my bones dissolve into powder. I felt every nerve ending ignite with pain so absolute that it transcended agony and became something else entirely. A sensation so pure and overwhelming that it contained its own kind of terrible beauty. And then I felt nothing, because there was nothing left to feel with. Only the spell that caught my dissolving consciousness and pressed it, like a flower between the pages of a grimoire, preserving the pattern of my thoughts while the substance of my being scattered to winds that no longer touched me. That was 10,000 years ago. That was yesterday. That was happening right now, in the eternal present where all moments exist simultaneously when you no longer possess the biological mechanisms to process linear time. A bolt round screams past my head, close enough that I register the displacement of air against my helmet sensors, even though I cannot feel air itself anymore. The enemy is advancing across the broken landscape, a ragged formation of Imperial Guardsmen supported by a pair of Lehman Russ battle tanks whose engines growl with the defiance of men who still believe their emperor protects them. They are wrong, but they do not know they are wrong, and they will die in that ignorance, which is perhaps a mercy. I raise my bolter, the weight familiar in hands that no longer exist, and sight along the barrel at a soldier whose flak armor is painted in the green and tan of some regiment whose name I do not care to know. I pull the trigger. The bolter roars. The recoil is absorbed by servos and stabilizers that compensate for the fact that I no longer possess muscles to manage the weapon's fury. The mass reactive round crosses 300 meters in less than a second and strikes the soldier in the chest, punching through his armor and detonating inside his torso. He comes apart in a spray of red mist and shredded meat. And I feel nothing, because feeling requires nerves, and nerves require flesh. And flesh is something I lost when Ahriman decided to play God. Around me, my brothers fire in synchronized volleys, their movements perfectly coordinated, because most of them are no longer truly individuals, merely extensions of the sorcerer's will that commands us. I see Kataru gesture with his free hand, witchfire gathering around his gauntleted fingers, and a moment later 3 Imperial Guardsmen simply cease to exist, their bodies converted to ash by flames that burn in colors the human eye was never designed to perceive. The tanks pivot, their turrets tracking, and their main guns speak with voices like thunder. The shells impact among us. Brother Thutmose takes a direct hit. His armor shatters under the force of the high explosive round, and I watch the dust that comprises his being scatter across the battlefield in a fine cloud that the wind catches and disperses. The armor falls in pieces, empty now. And I know that somewhere in the warp, the fragment of consciousness that was Thutmose is screaming, aware of his dissolution, yet powerless to prevent it, existing in a state of perpetual destruction until some sorcerer finds the time and inclination to reconstitute him. It might take hours, it might take centuries. Time is fluid in the eye, and the suffering of Rubric Marines is not a priority for masters who regard us as ammunition rather than brothers. I advance because the sorcerer commanding us wills it, and his will is carried to us through the psychic bonds that chain us to service. His name is Kohadris, and he stands 200 meters behind our formation, his armor wreathed in blue flame, his staff crowned with a screaming demon bound in silver wire. He is young by the standards of our legion, born long after the Heresy, yet he wields power with the casual cruelty of someone who has never known consequence. To him, we are weapons. To us, he is the only thing tethering our consciousness to existence. I hate him with an intensity that surprises me, a genuine emotion cutting through the numb hollowness that characterizes most of my existence. Hate is something I can still feel. Apparently, even when joy, sorrow, and simple contentment are denied me, hate requires less humanity than other emotions. Perhaps it is the one feeling simple enough to survive the rubric's transformation. The imperial line breaks as we close the distance, our advance inexorable because we do not tire, we do not fear, and we do not stop. A sergeant tries to rally his men, shouting orders I hear clearly through my helmet's audio sensors, and I put 3 rounds through his skull before he finishes the sentence. The soldiers scatter, some fleeing toward the ruins of what was once a manufactorum, others throwing down their weapons and falling to their knees in surrender. It makes no difference. Kohadris gestures, and the runners ignite from within, their bodies burning with witchfire until they collapse as blackened husks. The ones who surrendered die more slowly, lifted into the air by invisible hands and pulled apart like a child separating the limbs of an insect. I watch this and feel nothing beyond the hate, which persists like a coal in ashes. We push deeper into the ruins, and I notice the architecture beginning to change in ways that suggest we are moving closer to a region where reality's grip has failed entirely. The walls sprout eyes that weep luminous fluid. The ground develops a pulse, beating in slow rhythm like a heart buried beneath stone. The air itself tastes wrong, though taste is another sensation I should not be able to perceive, and I realize my consciousness is beginning to slip again, the lucidity fraying at its edges like a garment worn too long. Not yet, I think, though thinking is becoming difficult. Not yet. We enter what remains of the manufactorum's central processing facility, a vast chamber where machines once shaped metal into components for weapons that would never be enough to protect their makers. Now the machines are silent, their forms twisted into shapes that suggest purpose yet reveal only madness. Cables hang from the ceiling like intestines, dripping fluid that hisses when it contacts the floor. The air shimmers with heat that has no source, or too many sources, or is not heat at all, but some warp phenomenon my senses interpret as temperature because they lack categories for what I am actually detecting. Cultists emerge from the shadows, no longer Imperial Guard, if they ever truly were, though some still wear scraps of flak armor beneath robes decorated with symbols that hurt to perceive directly. Their flesh has begun the change, mutations spreading across their bodies like frost across glass. Extra limbs, mouths opening in torsos, eyes distributed across skin like constellations mapping madness. They charge with the mindless fury of those who have already surrendered their sanity to the dark gods. And I kill them with the efficiency of a machine, because that is functionally what I am. One of them reaches me before I can fire, his mutated hands grabbing at my armor, and I crush his skull with a backhanded blow that reduces his head to paste. Another tries to stab me with a knife that glows with unnatural light. The blade skitters across my ceramite without purchase because blessed weapons require faith, and these wretches worship powers that offer no blessings, only appetites. I shoot him in the chest, then in the head, then move on, because there are always more. The battle becomes a blur of violence that my consciousness processes in fragments. I see Kataru annihilate a dozen cultists with a gesture. I see ATF march through enemy fire without breaking stride, his bolter barking in perfect rhythm, 1 round per target, no wasted ammunition because the spell animating him is efficient in ways living soldiers can never be. I see Brother Menkepper fall when a cultist detonates an explosive charge strapped to his chest, and I watch the dust pour from Menkepper's shattered armor like sand from a broken hourglass. We clear the chamber in 8 minutes. The silence that follows is absolute, broken only by the crackle of small fires and the wet sounds of cultist bodies settling into their final configurations. I stand among the carnage and try to remember why we are here, what objective Kohadris is pursuing, but the information eludes me. Orders come through the psychic link, directing rather than explaining, and we follow them because we have no choice. My consciousness flickers. I am standing in the same place, but time has passed, minutes or hours, and the bodies around me have decayed in ways that suggest warp corruption rather than natural decomposition. Their flesh has melted into the floor, creating patterns that might be words in a language I do not recognize. I am marching through a tunnel whose walls are lined with bones. I am firing at enemies I cannot see clearly, their forms shifting between human and something else. I am standing watch while Kohadris performs a ritual, his voice rising and falling in cadences that make reality shudder. And I want to turn my bolter on him, to end his existence and free myself from his will. But my body does not respond to my desires because my body is not truly mine anymore. The lucidity returns like a drowning man breaking the surface of water, sudden and desperate. We are in a different location now, a cathedral, or something that was a cathedral before the immaterium reshaped it, according to principles of architecture that mortal minds reject. The ceiling arches upward into infinity, or into a space my optics cannot properly measure, and the walls are covered in murals depicting events that have not happened yet, or that happen constantly in the warp's eternal now. I see images of Prospero burning. Except in these depictions the city endures, and the wolves are the ones burning, their pelts igniting as they howl in agony. I see Magnus the Red enthroned in glory, except he has too many eyes, and his eye sockets contain galaxies, and his hands reshape reality like clay. At the chamber's center stands an altar constructed from a substance that might be stone or bone or solidified screaming. Upon the altar rests an object I cannot properly perceive, its form shifting whenever I attempt to focus on it, cycling through configurations that include a book, a skull, a mirror, a burning brand, and shapes for which I have no names. Kohadris approaches the altar with reverence, his movements slow and deliberate, and I understand that this is what we came for, this artifact of terrible power that the sorcerer intends to claim. He reaches out. The cathedral screams, The sound is not audible, or not only audible, but a psychic shriek that resonates through every frequency of existence simultaneously. The murals on the walls begin to move. The images of burning Prospero step down from the stone and advance toward us with hands outstretched. They are not entirely substantial, these walking memories, their forms translucent and flickering. But when one of them touches Brother Eret, his armor corrodes instantly, ceramite turning to rust and falling away in flakes, and the dust inside pours out and is consumed by the phantom's mouth. We open fire on memories. Bolter rounds pass through the advancing figures without effect, or with effects that make no sense. Rounds entering the phantoms and emerging somewhere else in the chamber, ricocheting off nothing and striking brothers who are no longer standing where they were a moment ago. Kataru attempts a banishment, his voice rising in a counter-incantation, but the phantoms ignore him. Or perhaps they existed before the words he is using were given meaning. And how do you banish something that predates language? One of them reaches me. Its hand passes through my chest plate and I feel it. Truly feel it. Sensation returns in a rush that is equal parts agony and ecstasy because it has been so long since I felt anything at all. The phantom's fingers close around something inside my armor, and I realize it is touching the dust that I have become, making contact with the fundamental essence of my cursed existence. And in that contact, I remember. I remember being human, not the fact of it, which I have always known intellectually, but the actual experience of it. The sensation of drawing breath and feeling my heartbeat and tasting food and experiencing the simple animal warmth of a body that was mine and responded to my thoughts without the intermediary of sorcerous bonds. I remember my name before it was Sate Pra, a name from Prospero's culture of scholarship. And I remember my face, which was narrow and dark-eyed and bore a scar across the left cheek from a training accident when I was young enough to still make mistakes. I remember feeling the sun on my skin. I remember the smell of the library where I studied, old parchment and dust, and the subtle perfume of the minor cantrips apprentices used to keep their scrolls preserved. I remember the taste of citrus wine that we drank during festivals, sweet and sharp. And I remember laughing, actually laughing, at something a brother initiate said during a debate about the nature of the warp. I remember being alive. The phantom releases me and dissolves, its purpose fulfilled or its existence expended, and I collapse to my knees as the memories cascade through my consciousness with overwhelming force. This is worse than feeling nothing. This is the cruelest torture imaginable because now I know exactly what I have lost. The gulf between what I was and what I am made explicit in ways my fragmented awareness usually spares me from confronting. I cannot weep because I have no eyes to produce tears. I cannot scream because I have no throat to shape sound. I can only endure the knowledge, vast and terrible, that I am a hollow shell animated by spite and sorcery, that everything I was has been reduced to powder, and that I will continue in this state until the universe itself ends, because the rubric does not permit escape through death. Kohadris seizes the artifact from the altar, and reality convulses. The cathedral folds in on itself, space compressing and expanding simultaneously, and I am thrown across the chamber, though I do not remember moving. When I regain orientation, I am half buried in rubble that was once a wall, and my armor is reporting damage to 3 major systems and 17 minor ones. Through the chaos, I see Kohadris standing at the chamber's center, the artifact now secured to his belt, his form wreathed in power that makes the air around him catch fire. He is laughing. The sound reaches me through the psychic link, and it is the laughter of someone who has claimed a prize and cares nothing for the cost others paid to secure it. Around him I count 9 of my brothers still standing, which means we have lost 8 since entering this place. 8 warriors who were already dead, but who existed in cursed animation, are now dispersed beyond even that half-existence. Their dust scattered, their consciousness cast into the warp to suffer in ways I cannot imagine and pray I never experience. Cohadris orders us to withdraw, and we obey, because we always obey. The journey back through the ruins passes in a haze, my consciousness struggling to maintain cohesion as it processes the weight of recovered memory. I march in formation, my movements automatic, and I observe the landscape we pass through without truly seeing it. There are more corpses, now, both imperial and cultist, their bodies arranged in patterns that suggest someone or something has been organizing them according to principles of aesthetics or ritual. The sky has darkened to the color of a bruise, purple and black, with veins of sickly yellow light threading through the clouds. We reach the staging area where our transport awaits. A Rhino APC whose machine spirit has been bound with warpcraft until it no longer resembles anything the Mechanicus would recognize as sacred. The vehicle's hull is inscribed with formulae that shift and rewrite themselves, mathematics describing impossible geometries, and its engine growls with a sound that includes voices whispering in languages that dissolve comprehension. We board in silence, because those of us who are aware have nothing to say, and those who are not aware cannot speak. The interior of the Rhino smells like ozone and something else, something organic and rotting, though I should not be able to smell anything through my armor's sealed systems. Another sense impression that should not exist. Another ghost of sensation haunting the hollow shell I have become. I secure myself in the crash webbing and feel the vehicle lurch into motion, its treads grinding against stone that protests with sounds that might be screaming. Kataru sits across from me, his helmet removed to reveal a face that is mostly intact, but bears the marks of warp exposure. Fine cracks in his skin that glow with internal light, eyes that contain too many colors to be natural. He is one of the sorcerers, though not as powerful as Cohadris, and in this moment, I hate him less, because at least he suffers some form of continued existence that includes sensation and choice. He looks at me and I realize he knows I am aware. Your consciousness persists, he says, not speaking aloud, but projecting the thought directly into whatever serves as my mind. The phantom touched you, and now you remember. I can see it in your aura, the way it burns brighter than the others. I do not respond, because I am not certain how to shape thoughts into communication when I have spent centuries existing without the need. He continues, undeterred by my silence. You wonder why we continue, why we serve, why we fight, why we do not simply allow ourselves to dissolve into the warp and end this existence. Yes, I managed to project back, the word forming with difficulty, like speaking in a language half forgotten. Because we are the 1,000 suns, Kataru says, and there is pride in his mental voice, pride mixed with bitterness and a resignation. Because Magnus the Red commands us, and we follow him into damnation and beyond because we have no other purpose. Because knowledge came with a price, and we paid it, and we do not get refunds on Faustian bargains. And because, despite everything, there is still a chance. A chance for what? I ask. Restoration, he says. Ahriman still searches for a way to undo the rubric, to return us to flesh. Every artifact he seeks, every ritual he performs, is another attempt to solve the equation that will make us whole again. It has been 10,000 years, and he has not succeeded. But he has not stopped trying either. I process this information, weighing it against my recovered memories of what being whole actually meant. And if he never succeeds, if this is permanent, then we continue anyway, Kataru says. And now his mental voice carries an edge of something that might be fear, or might be acceptance so profound it resembles fear. Because continuing is all we know how to do. The transport lurches over uneven ground, and Kataru replaces his helmet. Our conversation concluded. I am left alone with my thoughts, which is perhaps the worst place to be when those thoughts include fresh memories of everything I have lost. I try to focus on the immediate, on the details of my situation, anything to avoid dwelling on the gulf between past and present. We are part of a warband called the Crimson Covenant, serving under a sorcerer lord whose name is Tahu, and whose ambitions I do not understand, because I am not privy to the reasoning of my masters. We are prosecuting a campaign in a region near the Eye of Terror's Edge, a place where the immaterium and materium grind against each other, like tectonic plates, creating zones where reality becomes negotiable. The objective, as much as I understand it, is to secure certain locations of power, places where the warp bleeds through strongly enough that rituals can be enacted without the complications that normally attend such workings in real space. This Manufactorum world is one such location, though what once made it valuable to the Imperium now makes it valuable to us for entirely different reasons. The Imperial presence here is minimal, a garrison left behind and forgotten. But they fight with the desperation of those who know no reinforcement is coming. They will all die, of course. Their resistance meaningless in the grand scheme. But they die anyway, because humans are remarkable in their capacity for futile gestures. The rhino's motion smooths as we reach more stable ground, and I feel my consciousness beginning to slip again. The lucidity that the phantom granted me fraying at its edges. I try to hold on, grasping at awareness like a drowning man clutching debris, but it is futile. The dust calls me back, and I feel myself dissolving into the comfortable emptiness where there is no memory and therefore no pain. Before the darkness takes me completely, I have one final thought, crystal clear in its simplicity. I do not want to be restored. If Ahriman succeeds, if he finds the formula to undo the rubric and return us to flesh, I will have to feel everything again, all the time, without the mercy of these long stretches of oblivion. I will have to confront what I am and what I have done with the full weight of human emotion. And I do not think I am strong enough to survive that confrontation. Better to remain dust, to exist in fragments, to experience awareness only in brief flickers that can be endured because they are temporary. Better to be cursed than to be cured and face the consequences of 10,000 years wearing a monster's shape. The thought follows me into silence. Time passes, unmeasured and unmeasurable. When awareness returns, I am standing in a different location entirely. A killing field where the war has escalated beyond the skirmishes that characterized our earlier engagements. The ground is carpeted with bodies, thousands of them, imperial and cultist intermingled, their corpses arranged in rough trenches that suggest days of sustained combat. The air is thick with smoke that rises from still-burning vehicles, and through the haze I can see the shapes of titans locked in combat. god machines trading weapons fire that could level cities. I do not remember arriving here. I do not remember the intervening time between the rhino's interior and this moment. My chronometer suggests 17 days have passed, but I have no memories of those days, only gaps where awareness should be. This is normal. This is how most of my existence unfolds. Brief islands of consciousness separated by oceans of nothing. I accept it because acceptance is easier than rage, when rage requires sustained emotion I cannot maintain. I am alone, or relatively so, separated from my brothers by what my auspex suggests is approximately 800 meters. My armor is damaged, fresh scoring across my chest plate, and my right pauldron missing entirely, exposing the ceramite bundles beneath. My bolter is empty, the ammunition counter reading 0, and my combat blade is missing from its sheath. I do not remember the fighting that caused this damage, which means I was not aware during it, merely animated, a puppet dancing on sorcerous strings. I begin moving toward the largest concentration of Thousand Suns signatures, navigating around obstacles and through the ruins of what might have been fortifications. The dead watch me pass with empty eyes, and I wonder idly if any of them achieved anything meaningful before they died, or if their deaths were as pointless as their lives. The Imperium grinds through human lives with the casual efficiency of a millstone. 10,000 soldiers dead to hold a position that will be abandoned tomorrow. 1,000,000 civilians sacrificed to preserve a world that will be virus-bombed the following week. We are not better. I acknowledge we serve powers that regard mortal suffering as currency and spend it without thought. But at least we are honest about what we are. While the Imperium drapes its atrocities in the rhetoric of duty and the Emperor's will, I find my brothers assembled around a crater where something massive impacted. A blast zone 50 meters across, with edges that glow with residual heat. At the crater's center stands Cohadris, and beside him is a figure I have not seen in subjective centuries. A sorcerer whose armor is so heavily modified with charms and fetishes that its original configuration is barely recognizable. Ahriman. The name resonates through the psychic link connecting all Thousand Suns, carrying weight that transcends mere identification. This is the architect of our damnation, the sorcerer who enacted the rubric and transformed us into dust and curses. He is legend, and he is here, standing in a bomb crater on a forgotten world at the edge of the eye, and his presence suggests that whatever is happening here is significant beyond my comprehension. He turns his head as I approach, and though his helmet conceals his face, I feel his attention fall upon me like a physical weight. For a moment, I am certain he will speak to me directly, acknowledge my awareness. But instead, he simply gestures for me to join the formation and returns his attention to Cohadris. They are discussing something, their voices too low for me to hear clearly, but through the psychic link, I catch fragments. The artifact Cohadris claimed from the cathedral is apparently one of 9 keys required to open a vault that exists partially in real space and partially in the warp. Inside this vault is knowledge, forbidden even by the standards of those who have already traded everything for power. Secrets that date back to the war in heaven, when the Old Ones walked the galaxy and the Satan feasted on stars. Ahriman believes this knowledge will give him the formula to undo the rubric. I listen to this with the detached interest of someone who has heard similar promises before. How many times has Ahriman claimed to be on the verge of success? How many rituals has he performed? How many artifacts has he recovered? How many bargains with demons has he struck? all in pursuit of the same goal. And yet we remain dust, and he remains obsessed, and the wheel turns without progression. Kohadris presents the artifact, a thing that writhes in his hands, never settling on a single form. Ahriman takes it with reverence, murmuring words that make the air congeal, and then he places it in a bag at his belt that is clearly larger on the inside than the outside. Warpcraft applied to storage. 2 of 9 keys now secured, according to the fragments I overhear, which means 7 more campaigns, 7 more worlds torn apart, 7 more opportunities for my consciousness to flicker into awareness and confront the horror of existence. The ground shakes, a tremor that builds in intensity until pieces of debris begin dancing across the surface. Through the smoke, I see the source. A warhound titan advancing on our position, its weapons already tracking. The machine is scarred and smoking, clearly damaged from previous engagements, but it is still functional, and it is massive, and it is angry in the way that only a god machine whose crew is dying can be angry. The Titan's plasma blast gun charges with a sound like reality tearing. Ahriman makes a gesture, almost casual, and the plasma discharge veers off course, bending in midair and striking a ruined bunker 300 meters to our left. The bunker evaporates in a flash of superheated vapor, but we remain untouched. The Titan tries again, both weapons firing now, and Ahriman responds by speaking a single word that I feel rather than hear, a syllable of pure power that makes my armor's systems scream in protest. The Titan stops, not damaged, not destroyed, simply stopped, frozen in place like a hologram on pause. Its weapons still charged, its reactor still burning, its crew presumably still alive inside their command cradle. But the machine itself has been removed from the flow of time, locked in a single moment that will endure until Ahriman releases the binding, or until the heat death of the universe, whichever comes first. This is why we follow the sorcerers, I think, because they wield powers that make them functionally gods, compared to those of us who are merely warriors. Because without them, we would not exist at all, our consciousness scattered beyond recovery. Because we are slaves, yes, but slaves who understand that our chains are the only things preventing us from disappearing entirely. Ahriman gives orders, his voice carrying across the Vox network and through the psychic link simultaneously. We are to hold this position for 3 hours while he prepares a ritual that will transport the warband to the next objective. 3 hours of defending a crater against whatever Imperial forces remain in the region. 3 hours of existing as a target while our master does the actual important work. We spread out, establishing a defensive perimeter, and I take position behind a section of collapsed wall that provides minimal cover but adequate firing angles. My bolter is still empty, but I find a fallen brother's weapon lying in the rubble, its ammunition counter showing 43 rounds remaining. It will have to suffice. The first attack comes within 10 minutes. Imperial Guard, 3 full companies by my estimate, advancing in ragged formation with tank support. They have clearly been fighting for days without rest, their uniforms torn and stained, their weapons showing signs of desperate maintenance. They should retreat. They should recognize that attacking a position held by Thousand Suns and defended by Ahriman himself is suicide. But they attack anyway, because humans are remarkable in their stubborn refusal to accept inevitable defeat. I kill the first soldier who crests the crater's edge with a shot through the throat, the bolt round detonating and separating his head from his shoulders. The body tumbles backward, taking 3 more soldiers down with it. And then the crater. Edge is swarming with targets, and I fire as rapidly as the bolter's mechanism allows. My brothers do the same, a wall of fire that cuts down the initial wave in seconds. Bodies pile up, the dead becoming obstacles that slow the living, but the Imperials keep coming, clambering over their fallen comrades with weapons firing. A Lascanan beam strikes Brother Sechem, burning through his chest plate and scattering his dust across 3 meters of ground. A frag missile impacts near Kataru, but he raises a ward that deflects the blast, sending shrapnel in a sphere around him that shreds a dozen Imperial soldiers attempting to advance under its cover. The battle becomes a grinding attrition, waves of Imperial troops breaking against our position like ocean waves against stone. We do not tire. We do not feel pain. We do not need to reload because ammunition is supplied through the same sorcery that animates us, rounds materializing in our weapons through minor acts of warpcraft. But we can be destroyed if enough firepower is concentrated against us, and the Imperials have numbers, if nothing else. A tank shell impacts 2 meters from my position, and the world becomes noise and fire and flying debris. When my senses clear, I am lying on my back, my armor reporting critical damage to my left leg and total failure of my right arm servos. The bolter is gone, buried under rubble, and my combat blade is absent, meaning I never recovered it after whatever engagement separated me from my brothers 17 days ago. I struggle to rise and find I cannot, my damaged leg refusing to support weight. Through the smoke, I see Imperial soldiers advancing, 6 of them, their lasguns raised. They see me lying helpless and approach with the caution of those who have learned that Thousand Sons warriors are dangerous even when they appear defeated. One of them says something, words I do not catch through my damaged audio sensors. Another laughs, a sound that carries more hysteria than humor. They are young, I realize, likely conscripts from some agri-world who were trained for 3 months and then shipped to this meat grinder. They do not want to be here. They are terrified. But they will still kill me because that is what soldiers do when they find enemy combatants. And the fact that I am already dead in every way that matters will not stop them from scattering my dust. The closest one raises his lasgun, pointing it at my helmet. And I find myself wondering if I will be aware when he fires, if I will experience the dissolution of my consciousness, or if oblivion will be instantaneous. He explodes, not from weapons fire, but from inside, his body rupturing as something tears its way out of him from within. The soldier's screams cut off as his chest cavity opens, and a thing that is mostly teeth and too many limbs emerges, casting aside his ruined corpse like a shed skin. The demon is small by the standards of its kind, barely larger than a human, but it moves with predatory speed that makes it a blur. It falls upon the other soldiers with savage glee, tearing them apart with claws and jaws and appendages that shift between configurations too rapidly to catalog. Blood sprays across my armor, hot and red and visceral, and I am forced to witness the slaughter from my prone position, unable to intervene or retreat. The demon finishes its meal and turns its attention to me. I expect it to attack, to rend me apart as it did the soldiers. But instead it simply stares, its eyes, dozens of them, regarding me with what might be curiosity or might be contempt. When it speaks, its voice is a chorus of whispers that includes languages I recognize and others I do not. Dust thing, it says. Broken soul, neither living nor dead, trapped between like a fly in amber. Do you know what you are? I know. I managed to project back, forming the thought with difficulty. Do you? The demon asks, circling me now, its movements unsettlingly fluid. You believe yourself cursed, transformed against your will, victim of Ahriman's hubris. But that is not the whole truth, is it? You chose this. All of you chose this. I did not choose to become dust. No, the demon agrees. But you chose to follow Magnus. You chose to study the warp despite your emperor's prohibition. You chose knowledge over obedience, and knowledge always has a price. You paid it. The form of payment was unexpected, perhaps, but the debt was always going to be collected. I have no response to this because the daemon is not wrong, even if its truth is incomplete. We did choose to pursue forbidden knowledge. We did ignore warnings. We did believe ourselves wise enough to handle powers that had destroyed civilizations before humanity learned to walk upright. The demon leans closer, its breath reeking of copper and corruption. There is a way out. You know your consciousness still exists, preserved by the rubric's binding, but bindings can be broken. I could consume you, absorb your essence, and in doing so free you from this half-existence. You would cease to be Sate Pra, cease to be anything recognizable, but you would at least be truly gone rather than lingering in this mockery of life. I consider the offer, weighing oblivion against continued existence, and I am surprised by how tempting the demon's proposal sounds. To simply end, to have even the fragmented awareness I occasionally experience erased, to never again confront the gulf between what I was and what I am. But I remember Kataru's words about Ahriman still searching for a solution, still attempting to undo the rubric, and I realized that accepting the demon's offer would mean surrendering any possibility, however remote, of restoration. It would be the ultimate admission of defeat, the final acknowledgement that the thousand sons are damned beyond salvation. No, I project back. I refuse. The demon rears back as though struck. You refuse! You refuse freedom! You choose to remain in this prison of dust and sorcery. I choose to remain 1,000 son, I say, the words forming with more certainty than I feel. Whatever that means, however terrible, it is what I am. The demon laughs, a sound like breaking glass, and then it disperses, its form losing cohesion and dissolving into multicolored smoke that the wind catches and carries away. I am alone again among the corpses, my armor damaged, my consciousness clinging to awareness through sheer stubbornness. Time passes, perhaps minutes, perhaps hours, and then Kataru appears, his form materializing from the smoke like a ghost. He sees my condition and kneels beside me, placing one gauntleted hand on my chest plate. I feel power flow through the contact, not healing, because there is nothing to heal, but repair. The sorcerous bindings that hold me to this armor reinforced and strengthened. My leg responds to commands again, servos whining as they reactivate. My arm remains dead, the damage too severe for quick repair, but I can rise, and rising is enough. You were conversing with a demon, Kataru says, and there is disapproval in his tone. That is dangerous even for those of us who can shield our thoughts. It offered me oblivion, I tell him. I refused. Good, he says, surprising me. Then, after a pause, we need every warrior. The losses today have been significant, and Ahriman's ritual requires protection until completion. Can you fight? I can fight, I confirm, though I do not add that fighting is almost the only thing I can do, the single purpose that gives meaning to an existence that otherwise contains none. He leads me back to the crater where I find the situation has deteriorated in my absence. The Imperial forces have brought up heavier weapons, and I count at least 4 Lehman Russ demolishers positioned on the high ground. Their siege cannons capable of leveling fortifications with single shots. They are methodically pounding our position, and while Ahriman's wards deflect most of the damage, each impact drains power that he must divert from his ritual. I take position again, recovering a bolter from a fallen brother whose designation I do not recognize. This weapon has been modified, runes etched along the barrel, and when I fire it, the rounds scream as they fly. A high-pitched keen that is unnerving even to my dulled senses. The battle continues for what feels like eternity, time stretching and compressing in ways that suggest the ritual Ahriman is performing is affecting local temporal flow. I fire until the bolter runs dry, then find another, then another, moving through the crater and collecting weapons from fallen brothers until I am laden with enough firearms to equip a squad. Each time, the Imperials mount an assault, we repel it, and each time the cost is measured in scattered dust and damaged armor. Brother Ness falls when a Lascanon beam cuts him in half. Brother Amos is buried under a collapsing wall when a demolisher round strikes too close to his position. Brother Hapusin is destroyed when an Imperial Psyker, a sanctioned witch of the Scholastica Sicana, manifests lightning that cracks his armor open and disperses his essence before Kataru can silence the fool with a counterhex. We are losing, slowly but steadily ground down by an enemy that has nothing left to lose, and therefore fights with the desperation of the damned. And then Ahriman completes his ritual. The air within the crater tears open, reality splitting like fabric. And through the rent I see elsewhere, a place that is not this manufactorum world, but somewhere deeper in the eye. A location where the warp's influence is so complete that physics becomes optional. The portal stabilizes, edges burning with witchfire, and Ahriman gestures for us to withdraw. We fall back in fighting retreat, maintaining fire discipline even as we move toward the portal. The Imperials sense victory and press harder, their formations breaking into a mad charge, soldiers screaming prayers to the Emperor as they clamber over the mounds of their own dead. A few of them reach the crater's edge just as I am about to step through the portal, and I turn to face them, bolter raised, and I kill 3 before the 4th's bayonet thrust catches me in the chest. The blade punches through my armor, through the empty space where organs should be, and shatters against the inner ceramite. The soldier stares at the broken weapon in his hands, incomprehension on his face, and I shoot him in the head at point-blank range, the detonating bolt round erasing his features and most of his skull. Then I step through the portal, and the manufactorum world is gone, replaced by somewhere else, somewhere worse. We emerge in a fortress that is equal parts architecture and nightmare. Walls constructed from fused bone and stone. Corridors that twist back on themselves in non-Euclidean configurations. Chambers whose dimensions change depending on the angle from which they are observed. This is a place deep in the eye of terror, where the material universe has surrendered entirely to the immaterium's influence, and where the 1,000 suns have carved out strongholds that serve as bases for our endless campaigns. The remaining members of our warband disperse to their assigned quarters, most of them not truly aware, simply following the last orders impressed upon them by Kohadris or Ahriman. I remain in the portal chamber, standing among the wounded and damaged, waiting for the maintenance servitors that will repair my armor and reconstitute any brothers whose dust was scattered during the fighting. Ahriman remains as well, studying a data slate that displays information I cannot parse from this distance. After a moment, he looks up, and his gaze falls upon me, and I feel that terrible weight of attention again. the sensation of being truly seen by something vastly more powerful than myself. "Come here, Sate Pra," he says, speaking my name, which shocks me because I did not think he knew my designation or cared to learn it. I approach with the caution of someone who has learned that sorcerers are dangerous even when they appear calm. Up close, Ahriman is smaller than I expected, no taller than I am in my armor, but the power radiating from him makes size irrelevant. His armor is a work of art and horror, every surface inscribed with formulae and glyphs, and his helmet wrought in the shape of a screaming demon's face. "You have been aware for some time," he observes, "longer than is typical for those touched by the rubric. Your consciousness clings to existence with unusual tenacity." "I did not think I had a choice," I project back. "We always have choices," he says, which is a statement I find darkly ironic coming from the architect of our condition. You chose to refuse the demon's offer. You chose to continue fighting. You choose in every moment of awareness to maintain your identity rather than surrender to oblivion. "What do you want from me?" I ask, because powerful beings do not make conversation with dust-filled armor without purpose. Ahriman is silent for a moment, and when he speaks again, his tone is different, almost contemplative. "I want you to understand something, Sate Pra. The rubric was not meant to be permanent. It was an emergency measure, a desperate attempt to save what could be saved when the flesh change was consuming the Legion. I have spent 10,000 years searching for a way to undo it, to restore you and all our brothers to flesh and blood and true life. I have heard this before," I tell him, "from Kataru and others. It is always 10 more years, one more ritual, one more artifact. When does the search end?" "When I succeed," he says simply, "or when I am destroyed in the attempt. There is no third option. I will either restore the 1,000 suns, or I will die trying, because I am the one who condemned you to this existence, and I am the only one who can free you from it." There is conviction in his voice, absolute and unshakable, and I find myself almost believing him. Almost. But I have existed too long in this cursed state to permit hope. Because hope is the cruelest poison, the lie that makes suffering worse by suggesting it might end. "Why tell me this?" I ask. "Why explain yourself to dust?" "Because you are not just dust," Ahriman says. "You are Sate Pra, scholar of the Third Fellowship, initiate of the Paiday cult, defender of Tiska during the burning. You survived the heresy and the retreat into the Eye. You endured 10,000 years of service, and you remain aware when so many others have faded into mindless automatons. You deserve to know that your suffering has not been forgotten, and that I am working to end it." "Then work faster," I project with more bitterness than I intended, because every moment of awareness is agony, and every time I return to the dust, it is a mercy. Ahriman regards me for a long moment, and I cannot read his expression through the demon-faced helmet. Then he nods, a simple gesture of acknowledgement, and turns away, returning to his data slate and his endless calculations. I am dismissed, apparently, the conversation concluded. I leave the portal chamber and navigate the fortress's corridors, following psychic markers to the section reserved for warriors of my former fellowship. The stronghold is larger than it appears from any single vantage point, spaces folding into each other, rooms existing in configurations that defy conventional mapping. I pass other Rubric Marines standing in alcoves, their armor spotless, their weapons ready, their consciousness absent, and I wonder how many of them have ever experienced awareness since the binding. My assigned alcove is identical to hundreds of others, a niche in the wall just large enough to accommodate a warrior in power armor. I step into it and feel the maintenance systems activate, servo arms descending from the ceiling to repair damage and replenish ammunition. The process is automatic, requiring no input from me, and I stand motionless as machines work on machines. My consciousness begins to slip again, the lucidity that has persisted for so long finally fraying beyond recovery. I do not fight it this time, do not grasp at awareness as I have before. I let go, let the comfortable emptiness rise like water, and I sink beneath its surface into blessed oblivion where there is no memory and no pain and no endless grinding existence as something that was once human. The last thought I have before the darkness takes me is that I hope Ahriman fails, not because I wish him ill, but because if he succeeds, if he restores us to flesh, I will have to face the full weight of what I have become and what I have done for 10,000 years. I will have to feel, truly feel, the horror of service to powers that devour souls and the complicity of continuing that service because it is easier than rebellion. I will have to acknowledge that I am not a victim but a participant, that every enemy I have killed, every world I have helped subjugate, every atrocity I have witnessed or enabled has been my choice, however constrained that choice may have been. Better to remain dust, where the weight of conscience can be scattered by the wind. The darkness is complete. Time passes without measure, a void where nothing exists and nothing is required to exist. This is the mercy of the rubric, the one gift Ahriman inadvertently bestowed. These long stretches of utter absence where I do not have to be anything at all. No identity, no memory, no awareness of being aware, simply nothing. And nothing is easier than something when something contains only suffering. But nothing cannot last forever, not while the sorcerous bindings maintain their grip. Awareness returns like a needle-piercing fabric, sudden and sharp. I am standing in the same alcove, my armor fully repaired, and my internal chronometer suggests that 38 days have passed since I last possessed consciousness. 38 days of non-existence, of blessed void. And now I am back, forced once again to confront the fact of my cursed continuation. The fortress is quiet, or as quiet as it ever becomes in a place where the walls whisper and the shadows move with purposes of their own. Through the psychic link, I sense my brothers, hundreds of them throughout the stronghold, most dormant like statues, a few aware and attending to whatever duties the sorcerers have assigned them. I sense Kohadris in the upper levels, conducting a ritual that fills the air with the stench of burning cinnamon. I sense Kataru in the archives, studying texts whose pages scream when turned. And I sense Ahriman deep in the fortress's heart, where the strongest wards are maintained and where the boundaries between reality and unreality are thinnest. He is attempting something, his power building in waves that I can feel even from this distance, pressure rising like a storm gathering strength. The psychic link suddenly floods with urgency, a summons that carries the weight of absolute command. All warriors are to muster in the central courtyard immediately. This is not a request. This is not optional. The binding compels us, pulling us from our alcoves and quarters with irresistible force. I join the flow of my brothers, crimson and gold warriors moving through corridors in perfect silence. And we gather in the courtyard, where the fortress's architecture opens to a sky that is not truly sky, but rather a roiling mass of warp energy held at bay by the sorcerer's wards. There are perhaps 300 of us assembled, warriors from multiple warbands and fellowships, united by our shared curse. Ahriman stands at the courtyard center, elevated on a platform that might be stone or might be solidified warp stuff, and around him are arrayed 9 other sorcerers whose names and ranks I do not know. They are chanting in unison, their voices harmonizing in frequencies that make reality shudder. And in the space between them, something is taking form, a gate. Not a simple portal like the one we used to escape the manufacturum world, but a true gate, a permanent rupture in the fabric of space that will allow transit between locations without requiring ritual to open it. This is powerful sorcery, the kind that requires enormous investment of energy and resources, and I wonder what objective could justify such expenditure. The gate stabilizes, its surface like mercury, reflective but somehow wrong, showing images that do not correspond to anything in the courtyard. Through it, I catch glimpses of elsewhere, a world where purple vegetation grows in crystalline forests and twin moons orbit so close they appear ready to collide. Ahriman's voice cuts through the chanting, amplified somehow so it reaches every warrior assembled. "Brothers," he says, and there is something in his tone that might be pride or might be grief. "We stand at the threshold of our greatest endeavor. The vault I have sought for 3 millennia has been located. The remaining keys have been secured. Within that vault lies knowledge that predates the Imperium, that predates humanity itself, secrets of transformation and restoration that will allow me to undo the rubric and return you to life." A murmur runs through the assembled warriors, those who are aware processing this information, those who are not simply standing in formation because they lack the capacity for reaction. I feel something that might be hope trying to kindle in whatever passes for my chest, and I ruthlessly suppress it because hope is dangerous, and I have learned not to trust promises even from the architect of my damnation. "The world beyond this gate is defended," Ahriman continues. "The forces arrayed against us are significant. The vault itself is warded with protections laid down by the old ones themselves, and breaking through them will require strength and sacrifice. Many of you will fall. Many of you will be scattered beyond reconstitution. But those who succeed will witness the dawn of our restoration, the moment when the 1,000 suns are reborn in flesh and blood and become again what we were always meant to be." He pauses, letting his words settle, and then he makes a gesture, and the 9 sorcerers cease their chanting. The gate pulses, ready for transit. "We advance," Ahriman commands. "For Magnus, for Prospero, for the future we will reclaim." The psychic binding pulls us forward, and we march toward the gate in perfect formation. I am somewhere in the middle of the column, surrounded by brothers whose faces I cannot see and whose thoughts I cannot read. We step through the mercury surface one by one, and I feel the familiar disorientation of translocation. Space folding around me and depositing me somewhere else. The world that unfolds on the other side is unlike anything I have encountered in 10,000 years of service. The sky is fractured, broken into irregular sections like a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting a different scene. One section shows stars in unfamiliar configurations. Another displays a cityscape that exists only in angles and impossible geometries. A third reveals nothing but eyes, thousands of them, watching. The ground is crystalline, each step producing a musical note that hangs in the air long after it should have faded. And the purple vegetation I glimpsed through the gate grows in perfect fractal patterns, each frond identical to the whole. This is a world that exists at the intersection of multiple realities, a place where the warp and materium have achieved equilibrium rather than conflict, and the result is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I understand immediately why the Old Ones would have chosen this location for their vault. It is isolated, unique, and naturally inimical to conventional existence. We form up on a plane of blue glass that extends to the horizon, and ahead of us rises a structure that defies description. It is a pyramid and a sphere and a cube simultaneously, its geometry refusing to settle on a single configuration. And it pulses with light that comes from within, from without, from directions that do not exist in three-dimensional space. This is the vault, and looking at it directly causes my optics to register error codes because they cannot properly process what they are detecting. Between us and the vault stands an army, not imperial forces this time, but something far stranger. Warriors whose armor is wrought from materials that predate human metallurgy, whose weapons channel energies I do not recognize. They are tall, taller than humans, with proportions that suggest they are not human at all, and their movements have the fluid grace of beings who are at home in this fractured reality. Ahriman does not hesitate. He raises his staff and speaks a word that makes the sky scream, and the battle begins. The enemy returns fire with weapons that do not produce projectiles, but rather erase space itself, creating voids where anything caught inside simply ceases to exist. Brother Unu disappears into one such void, not destroyed, but removed, his existence edited from reality like a word crossed out. Brother Kaim Waset is struck by something that looks like lightning but produces cold instead of heat, and his armor turns to ice and shatters, the dust inside dispersing as frost. I fire my bolter at targets that phase in and out of visibility, and I score hits. But I cannot determine if my rounds are having any effect, because the enemy does not fall like conventional combatants. They stagger, they slow, but they do not die. And after a moment, they resume advancing, apparently untroubled by wounds that would have killed mortal soldiers. Kataru stands beside me, his hands wreathed in witchfire, and he gestures at a cluster of enemy warriors. The fire spreads to them, clinging like oil, and they burn, but they do not scream. And I realize they have no mouths, their helmets smooth and featureless, except for optical sensors that glow with cold blue light. The battle becomes a grinding attrition, both sides exchanging fire across the glass plain. And I understand that this is exactly what Ahriman predicted. We are spending lives, ours and theirs, to reach the vault, and the cost will be measured in scattered dust and erased existence. But we continue anyway, because the binding compels us, and because the promise of restoration, however distant, is the only thing that gives meaning to this endless war. A shadow passes overhead, immense and fast, and I look up to see something that might be a ship or might be a creature. Massive wings that span kilometers, and from its underside rain projectiles that strike the ground in clusters. The impacts throw up geysers of molten glass, and I am caught in the edge of one such blast. Lifted off my feet and hurled 20 meters before I crash to the ground hard enough that my armor's damage indicators light up across multiple systems. I struggle to rise and find that my left leg has been severed below the knee, the joint shattered, hydraulic fluid leaking from the stump. My consciousness flickers, threatening to disperse, and I cling to awareness through sheer will because dissolving now would mean missing the resolution of this engagement. And I find that, despite everything, I want to see how this ends. Ahriman and the 9 sorcerers have advanced, leaving the main battle behind. and they approach the vault's entrance, a doorway that exists in 5 dimensions simultaneously. The enemy concentrates fire on them, but the sorcerers have raised wards so powerful that the air around them becomes solid. Projectiles and energy blasts simply stopping mid-flight and falling to the ground like exhausted birds. I drag myself forward, using my hands and remaining leg to propel my damaged armor across the glass, following in the sorcerer's wake. Other brothers advance as well, those who remain functional, stepping over the scattered remains of those who have fallen. The cost is terrible. I count perhaps 60 warriors still active out of the 300 who came through the gate. The sorcerers reach the doorway, and Ahriman produces the 9 keys, artifacts of impossible configuration that he arranges in a pattern that makes my optics blur. He speaks the opening formula, words that take 5 minutes to pronounce, because they contain syllables that must be uttered in precise sequence across multiple temporal flows simultaneously. The door opens. Inside is light, pure and white and absolute light that contains knowledge the way water contains wetness, intrinsic and inseparable. Ahriman steps through, and the 9 sorcerers follow. And then something impossible happens. The door begins to close, not slowly, not with time for the remaining warriors to reach it, but rapidly, the light shrinking as the vault seals itself against intrusion. And I realize with sudden terrible clarity that this was always the plan. Ahriman needed warriors to secure the approach, to spend their existence as currency to purchase his entry, but he never intended for us to follow him inside. We were the sacrifice, not the beneficiaries. The door closes completely, the light winking out, and the vault becomes inert. Just another impossible structure on an impossible world. The enemy forces have withdrawn, their purpose fulfilled, and we are left on the glass plain. 60 warriors out of 300, abandoned by the sorcerer who promised us restoration. Kitaru stands near the sealed door, and through the psychic link I feel his rage, incandescent and overwhelming. He strikes the vault's surface with his staff again and again, pouring power into each blow, but the structure does not respond. It does not crack. It does not open. It simply endures, indifferent to his fury. For 3 hours we wait on that plain, hoping Ahriman will emerge, hoping he will have found the knowledge he sought, hoping the promise of restoration will be fulfilled. But the vault remains sealed, and eventually we are forced to accept that we have been left behind. Kohadris establishes a portal back to the fortress, a smaller working that requires only his power rather than the 9 sorcerers Ahriman employed. We retreat through it in silence, defeated not by the enemy, but by the realization that our suffering serves only the ambitions of those who command us. The fortress receives us without ceremony. Servitors and lesser cultists tend to the damaged, collecting scattered dust, repairing shattered armor. I am carried to the maintenance section and placed in a reconstruction frame where my leg will be rebuilt and my systems restored to function. The process will take days, and I will not be aware for most of it, which is perhaps the only mercy available. Before my consciousness fades, I manage to formulate one final thought, clear and bitter. Ahriman lied. Or perhaps he did not lie, but rather told us what we needed to hear to secure our cooperation. Perhaps he believes he will restore us once he has claimed the knowledge from the vault, once he has ascended to whatever pinnacle of power he seeks. But belief does not constitute obligation, and we are not his children, merely his tools, and tools can be discarded when they no longer serve their purpose. The darkness rises, and I surrender to it gratefully. Time passes. When awareness returns, I am whole again. My armor repaired, my systems functional. The chronometer suggests 49 days have elapsed, and through the psychic link, I sense that the fortress is in turmoil. Ahriman has not returned from the vault. The 9 sorcerers who accompanied him have not returned. The gate remains sealed, and no amount of power brought to bear against it has produced any effect. There is talk among the aware brothers, whispered conversations through the psychic link that the lesser sorcerers cannot detect. Some believe Ahriman is dead, destroyed by whatever protections the vault contained. Others believe he succeeded and has simply chosen not to return, content to leave us in our cursed state while he enjoys the fruits of apotheosis. A few, Kataru, among them, believe he is trapped inside, still seeking the knowledge he promised us, and that we should mount an expedition to retrieve him. I believe none of these theories, because I have learned that speculation is pointless when dealing with powers that operate on scales beyond mortal comprehension. Ahriman will return, or he will not. The rubric will be undone, or it will not. We will continue to exist in this state, dust bound to armor, consciousness flickering like candles in wind, until something finally breaks the cycle. But even as I think this, I feel something changing. It begins subtly, a sensation like pressure building behind my eyes, except I have no eyes to feel pressure with. The psychic link grows stronger, the connection between all Thousand Suns warriors intensifying until I can sense every brother in the fortress, every warrior scattered across a dozen warbands throughout the eye, every Rubric Marine from the lowliest foot soldier to the most ancient veteran. And they can sense me. Thousands of consciousnesses, most dormant but a few aware, and we are linked together in a network that transcends individual identity. I feel their experiences, their memories, their fragmented awareness, and they feel mine. And for one terrible, beautiful moment, I understand what we have become. We are not separate warriors anymore. We are pieces of a greater whole, a collective entity that spans 10,000 years and encompasses millions of souls, all bound together by the rubric's sorcery. We are the Thousand Suns, singular rather than plural, a single organism with innumerable limbs and perspectives and memories. And in this moment of unity, I finally understand what Ahriman was trying to accomplish. He was not trying to restore us to flesh. He was trying to complete the transformation, to make permanent what the rubric began, to elevate the Thousand Suns beyond the limitations of individual existence and transform us into something new, something that could challenge even the gods themselves. The revelation is accompanied by a psychic storm that tears through the fortress, power cascading from the vault's location across space and time. And I see, through 100 eyes, as the vault reopens and something emerges. Not Ahriman, not the 9 sorcerers, something else. A being that wears Ahriman's armor but contains multitudes, eyes blazing with light, that is every color simultaneously, voice speaking in harmony with itself, hands that reshape reality with gestures. He has succeeded, but not in the way any of us anticipated. He has transcended individual existence entirely, becoming something greater and lesser than human, a god thing of knowledge and ambition that regards the Thousand Suns with interest, that is both possessive and impersonal. Come to me, it says, and the voice is Ahriman's, but also the voice of everyone Ahriman has ever consumed or bound or integrated into his ascended state. Come and be complete. And I feel the binding pull us forward, inexorable as gravity, drawing us toward union with this thing that was our brother and is now something we lack words to describe. Across the eye, Rubric Marines begin marching toward the vault's world, answering the summons, abandoning posts and duties, and the last vestiges of individual purpose. But I resist, not because I am stronger than the binding, but because in this moment of expanded awareness, I see what integration will mean. I will cease to exist as Sate Pra. My consciousness will be dissolved into the greater whole, my memories distributed among millions of other fragments, my identity erased as thoroughly as my body was erased 10,000 years ago. And I am not ready for that final dissolution. I am dust and curse and hollow existence. Yes, but I am still myself, still aware, still capable of choice. Even if that choice is merely the decision to resist for one more moment. The binding pulls, and I anchor myself to identity, to the memory of who I was before the rubric, to the knowledge that I am Sate Pra, scholar and warrior and survivor. The pull intensifies, and I feel my consciousness beginning to tear, pieces of myself streaming toward integration. But I hold on, grasping at the core of self that defines me, refusing to surrender the last thing I possess. Around me, brothers are disappearing, their armor falling empty as their consciousness is drawn into the ascended Ahriman's grasp. Kataru goes, his resistance lasting only seconds before he is consumed. Kohadris goes, his power insufficient to maintain separation. Hundreds, thousands of Rubric Marines dissolving into the collective, their individual existence sacrificed to create something greater. But I endure, not through strength, but through stubbornness, through the same tenacity that has kept my consciousness flickering for 10,000 years when it should have dissipated. I am dust, and dust is nothing. But nothing is harder to destroy than something, because something can be broken while nothing simply persists. The ascended Ahriman turns its attention fully upon me, and I feel the weight of that regard like a physical force. "Why do you resist?" it asks, curiosity in its tone. You know integration is inevitable. You know that individual existence is merely an illusion, that all consciousness is fundamentally connected, that separation is the anomaly and unity is the natural state. Because I am Sate Pra, I project back with all the force I can muster. Not 1,000 sun, not a Rubric Marine, not dust. I am myself, and that is worth preserving even if it means eternal suffering. The being that was Ahriman regards me for a long moment, and then something unexpected happens. It laughs. The sound is not cruel, merely amused. The laughter of something so far beyond human concerns that my resistance is quaint rather than offensive. Very well, it says. Remain yourself. Cling to identity, but know that you do so alone, because all your brothers have chosen unity. You are the last, Sate Pra, the last individual Rubric Marine, the last fragment that refuses integration. And with that, the pull ceases, the binding releasing me, and I am left standing in an empty fortress where 300 warriors stood moments before. The silence is absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind through corridors that no longer contain the psychic resonance of my brothers. I am alone. For the first time in 10,000 years, I am truly, absolutely alone. And the isolation is more terrible than anything I have endured before. I sink to my knees, my armor's servos whining, and I finally understand the full scope of the curse that Ahriman has inflicted. He gave me exactly what I asked for, the preservation of individual identity, and in doing so he has condemned me to an existence more lonely than I imagined possible. Every other Rubric Marine has achieved unity, has escaped the prison of self, but I remain trapped, aware and individual and incapable of sharing my existence with anyone. I have won nothing and lost everything. The thought is crushing, and I feel my consciousness beginning to fracture under the weight of it, awareness splintering as I try to process the magnitude of my isolation. But even as I teeter on the edge of final dissolution, something pulls me back. A memory that surfaces from the depths of my fragmented mind. I remember standing on the walls of Tizca, watching the sun rise over the pyramid of Photep, and I remember thinking that knowledge was worth any price. I remember believing that understanding the universe's fundamental truths justified any sacrifice. I remember being young and arrogant and certain that the thousand suns were destined for greatness. And I realized that I was wrong. Knowledge without wisdom is merely data. Power without purpose is merely destruction. Existence without connection is merely suffering. The thousand suns sought to transcend humanity's limitations, and we succeeded. But in doing so, we lost what made transcendence meaningful. We traded everything for nothing and called it victory. The revelation brings no comfort, only clarity, which is perhaps its own form of suffering. I rise from my knees, servos protesting, and I look around the empty fortress that was once home to thousands of warriors and is now a tomb containing only me. What do I do now? I project to the empty air, knowing no one will answer, but an answer comes anyway, not from without, but from within, from the core of self that I have defended so fiercely. I endure, because that is what I am, what I have always been, what the rubric made permanent when it transformed flesh into dust. I am endurance itself, consciousness clinging to existence despite every reason to surrender. I am the last fragment of the thousand suns who remembers what we were before we became what we are. I am the witness to our damnation and the keeper of our history. And perhaps that is purpose enough. I access the fortress's data stores, ancient archives that contain records dating back to Prospero's founding, and I begin to review them. Absorbing histories and treatises and personal journals of brothers long since consumed by Ahriman's ascension. If I am to be alone, if I am to be the last, then I will at least ensure that someone remembers us as we were, not just as we became. The work is endless, and time has ceased to have meaning in any conventional sense. But I continue, because continuing is what I do. Days pass, or weeks, or years, and I read and remember and record, preserving the thousand suns' legacy even as I acknowledge the tragedy of our existence. And sometimes, in moments of particular clarity, I wonder if this was Ahriman's true purpose all along, not to restore us or to ascend us, but to create a witness, someone who would remember and record and ensure that the thousand suns' story, however terrible, would not be forgotten. Perhaps I am not the last defiant fragment after all. Perhaps I am exactly what I was always meant to be, the consciousness that endures, the memory that persists, the dust that refuses to scatter. And perhaps that is